everyone. So I wanted to kind of go over definitions of different types of books and how I think some people get some authors mixed into a different type of genre than what they are really, you know. And so I wanted to basically discuss definitions between what is a romance novel, what is considered a love story, what's considered women's fiction, and obviously regular fiction. So I was watching this video, and I don't want to shit on the person because, you know, they made their points, you know, and I would say I agree with them to a certain extent when it comes to different things, but I don't agree with everything. So this person had did this video where it says spicy romance is hurting women, and I wanted to kind of do my rebuttal to it and say, like, here's my things of when they talk about the difference between romance novels, erotica, and love stories and things like that, and also women's fiction. So there's multiple points I wanted to make in here. But one of the things I wanted to go with is I have one of the books that the creator was talking about, and I would say one of the things that at least this one does is it has multiple things to it that lets you know exactly kind of what you're getting into. So I wanted to kind of talk about this book here. So we got Deep In by Ali Hazelwood. I would say I do consider Ali Hazelwood more light romance because most of her books revolve around STEM and women in STEM and things like that. So it's more of like, I would say light on the romance. Like there's romance in her books, but I'd say like it kind of gets confused with like women's fiction a little bit. And so I noticed that Ali Hazelwood, Emily Henry, Carly Fortune, Ali Jimenez, they're more of like, they're super popular, but I think the reason why they're super popular is because they're more light on when it comes to like spicy and all that stuff. And you'll have some people who delve into romance novels and they particularly like those particular authors because they don't get like real graphic, I would say, with their novels, where this one here is supposedly like BDSM. So this is, I think, probably the most spicy that the author has done. So I've heard like different people kind of go back and forth with this novel. Some people like it, some people didn't like it. But I will say, like, when you look at the cover, to me, it screams romance. I will say, again, to reiterate, I've made another video about this. I don't like cartoon covers. I think they're very deceptive, they're very deceiving, very predatory, and I don't like them. They're very misleading, all that stuff. But this one here, I would say, not really, because you have this one here, they're in a pool, obviously. I would say maybe if you're used to the author having a different style and she does something different, you could get upset over that. I can understand that. But if you look on the inside flap, there is some kind of like obviously spicy scene. And this is not even like the worst of what I've seen or high spice that I've seen. I mean, I collect old school clinch covers. So, I mean, I've seen heaving bosoms and all that stuff. I mean, this is like, to me, this is like not bad, you know? And then we got the one on this side where she's holding his hand, kind of like holding it back and all that stuff. And so supposedly this one here is about like a BDSM relationship. So this takes place in like college time. But I will say, like, if you look at this, you look on the inside flaps, you look on the back, it says steamy romance, steamy college romance. And right here, at least it gives you a label of contemporary romance. So, I mean, you know exactly what you're getting into. Most cases, when it comes to romance, most of the time, you're going to have sex on page romances. If you're looking for clean romance or fade to black romance, what we consider fade to black, it's not a book term, but it's a term a lot of us use, and it's basically a Hollywood term. So we'll say fade to black, but the technical term is like clean romance, where either there's no sex on page, or you have it to where if it's clean, there's that. And I would say fade to black is more of like, it's not in the graphic scenes, sex scenes are not in detail. They're more glossed over. And you probably would find them a lot in Harlequin romances. A lot of them have more glossed over sex on page scenes. Also, I would say there's different authors out there, like Emily Henry, Abby Jimenez. Those authors right there have more glossed over sex scenes where they're not in graphic detail, you know? So I would say that's why those authors are particularly popular within the genre of romance. But there are certain authors, I just don't consider them to be romance. I consider them to be more women's fiction. So I wanted to talk about one of the comments I saw on that video, that particular video, where this person had said, say what you will about Nicholas Sparks' writing, but he wrote romance novels that were really good without having to rely on explicit sexual scenes. So I responded to that because I was like, Nicholas Sparks is not a romance writer. He writes love stories. There's a difference. Romance genre has a guaranteed HEA or HFN. Guaranteed happily ever after or happy for now. Love stories, on the other hand, do not have a guaranteed HEA. He writes love stories, or say contemporary fiction. So I had said Nicholas Sparks isn't a romance author. He even states it himself that he doesn't write romance. If one of the main characters dies, then it's not a romance novel. He has romantic elements in his novels, but he writes fiction books. His books are not even in the romance genre section of when you go into a bookstore. If they're there, then that means they have been misplaced there. He writes fiction books, contemporary fiction, sometimes historical fiction, but he writes contemporary fiction with romantic elements in them. So that's why I would call his stories more love stories, not in the romance genre. So it says here, Nicholas Sparks is a famous romance author. That's not true. He's not a romance author. Like I said, he even states it. He doesn't write happily ever afters. He writes more surprise endings. Although his fiction usually involves love stories, he rejects the suggestion that he is a romance novelist. Like I said, he is not. He writes love stories. Love stories are not in the same category as romance, the genre. So it says two different genres. Romance and love story are two different genres. In a romance, the relationship is the plot and point of the story, and the central tension is based around the question, how will they get together? Romance novels focus on the relationship between two or more people as they fall in love, and the plot has to hinge on the romantic relationship. They also end either happily ever after or at least happy for now. In a love story, there is a different story point and goal to be achieved. Something besides love is at stake. And this is true. That's why I said I don't consider Nicholas Sparks to be, and he even stated he is not a romance novelist. So I'm tired of people putting him in the same category when he doesn't write romance. He writes love stories. And then women's fiction often gets pushed into the romance section. I honestly think it should be in the fiction section with Nicholas Sparks books. women's fiction should be pushed into the fiction section. If not, they should have their own section of women's fiction. I don't believe romance novels should be mixed in with women's fiction. They're two different genres. So women's fiction focuses on a woman's journey, whenever that may take her and whatever that may encompass, while romance novels focus entirely on the romantic relationship and guarantee a happy ending for the hero and heroine. So when you look onto Amazon and say, I'm using Funny Story as an example for Emily Henry, if you look down where the product information is, it says contemporary women fiction. It may say contemporary romance or romantic comedy, but it is mostly a contemporary women's fiction. Or they say women's domestic life fiction. It's women's fiction. She may have romantic elements in her stories, but they are women's fiction. That's the way I consider them to be, is women's fiction. Maybe they're a different type of women's fiction now. It's kind of like evolved a little bit, but they definitely are women's fiction. They're not romance. Everybody puts them in the romance category, and I don't consider Emily Henry to be a romance author. Abby Jimenez is the same way. I have this just for the summer. If you look down in her product description, contemporary women's fiction. And her scenes are more glossed over, what I would title them as fade to black. They don't go into graphic detail. Even though it says romantic comedy and contemporary romance, like I said, I do consider them to be more contemporary women's fiction. Same thing with Carly Fortune. This one here is her newest one Golden Summer. Down at the bottom it says coming of age fiction, women's friendship fiction, and contemporary women's fiction. So this is definitely a women's fiction book. It is not a romance. And I'm tired of her being pushed into the category of romance and in the romance section when she's not a romance author, So it just gets frustrating. It gets very frustrating. So I wanted to use another example of Nicholas Sparks. So this is The Notebook. I actually read this book years ago. I read The Notebook. Now, if you look down in the product description, it says classic American literature, 20th century historical romance, because it took place in like the 50s, I think, the first point of it. Classic literature and fiction. Like I said, he's not romance. He's not a romance author. So when it comes to those books, I kind of get irritated with it. And then, people will get erotica confused with romance as well. And I think those particular books should have some type of label on it to state that it's erotic, because not all of them have it in there where it says erotic romance or erotic novel. Not all of them have it. So this one person wrote erotica. So it says erotica is a genre. Erotica is not a theme, style, literary device, or trope. A book does not automatically fall into the erotic genre due to the presence of sex scenes. So it says TLDR, romance equals the central theme is love. Erotica, the central theme is sexual discovery. So it says, what elements make up a romance novel? So the story must end in a happily ever after or happy for now. I wasn't kidding when I said it last week. So obviously she does this, stuff. The external plot should bring the love interests together and pull them apart. No cheating, although I do feel this rule might be too strict at times. My rule of thumb is if it works, but I suggest keeping the sleeping with others before the two love interests meet, because how great was it to see Anthony Bridgerton give up his wandering eye and rakish ways when he met Edwina Sharma. Now, they're talking about the new iteration of the Bridgertons, which I'm not a fan of. I'll just say that. So this is what elements make up erotica. The primary plot is typically one of sexual discovery. At any life stage, this is not limited to a virgin character. A romance subplot doesn't need to be included. So it says erotic romance is not both genres. Erotic romance falls under the romance genre. A more specific definition, an erotic romance is a love story where the love develops through sexual discovery. She says, e.g., 50 Shades of Grey. I hate when everybody uses that. I hate when everybody uses that. They use that book. And to me, I'm just like, 50 Shades of Grey is what I would consider light BDSM, like an introductory novel into BDSM, because I don't particularly like that author's writing. I think she's a very bad writer. I don't think she's a very good writer. So, erotica is basically, like they stated, it's mainly around the sex. That's mainly the focus point of that book. Erotic romance, it's going to have a lot more sex scenes to it, but it also has a romance added to it. So you can, I have read some historical erotic romances where there's definitely like more sex scenes added to the book, maybe more like BDSM elements and stuff like that, or other types of kink can be put into maybe more an erotic or erotica type of setting. Erotic romances can have that setting to them. So that's why I'm like, there are different definitions. You know, there's regular romance genre, or there's erotic romance or erotica, you know? And then you have women's fiction, like I said, that gets mixed in a lot with romance, and it's a different thing entirely, you know? Like I said, women's fiction is mainly the woman's journey. There might be a subplot of a romance in the book, but the romance is not the main focal point of the book. The main part of the book is the woman's journey. So I do get irritated when people get a lot of them confused. So this one person was talking about how they considered corn to be in the same category as romance novels for women. And I disagree with that. So this one person said, author life coach Kimberly Sayer Giles presents the argument that romance novels have the same effect on a woman's brain as, pornographic images have on a man's, basically, stimulate the heck out of them. She quotes a psychologist and a therapist who claim that this chemical reaction may even constitute a form of addiction. This addiction can become serious in the sense that it affects one's life. For example, excessive consumption of romance novels can negatively affect a woman's marriage or keep her single by giving her an unrealistic idea of love and sex. So I didn't go into the whole part of the article. I just kind of like highlighted that part of it. But I wrote down notes that I wanted to say when it came to this type of, when people want to generalize romance and put it in the same category as watching porn, So I had said romance novels versus porn. So I said, first, let me start out by saying that I feel like anything in excess can have a negative effect on you, especially if you are the type of person who gets addicted to certain things easily. Anything you consume can be unhealthy. I do believe things should be consumed in moderation. So example, sugar can be okay, but too much can be very unhealthy to your body. So I said, but I do think there is a distinct difference when you compare porn addiction to reading romance novels. So even if you compare erotic novels, which are not in the same genre as romance, it is a separate genre that tends to get mixed in with the romance genre, it still isn't the same at all. So I said, reading romance typically only affects yourself. So if romances are considered harmful to your brain, which I personally do not agree with myself, it only affects yourself. The only time I would say that romance novels can affect another person is if you put unrealistic expectations onto your romantic relationship by comparing the heroes in your fictional books to your significant other in real life. you have to separate the two, because what you read in a fictional world may not be the same as real world situations, because those fictional men are written mostly by women for women. So essentially, romance novels are women's sexual fantasies. I do believe, though, with a well-written romance, you can certainly apply some good/healthy things to your relationship from what you read in romance novels. Like I said, number one, examples: a man listening to your wants and needs in and outside of the bedroom. Number two, a man respecting, protecting, and defending you. Three, a man respecting your body and when you say no. I said I can come up with other examples, but those are just a few examples you can get from a really good romance novel if you wanted to apply them to a real life relationship. Where with corn addiction, it not only affects you, but it can affect any romantic relationship you get into, because you could be putting your partner in a potentially uncomfortable sexual situation they don't want to be in, because you've set unrealistic expectations for your sexual relationship, which I said before can be implied if you have an unhealthy or unrealistic relationship for reading fictional stories. But consuming corn also affects the performers of these sexual adult industries, because if corn is super popular, the industry hypes up and produces more of what gets popular. So if grape scenes are popular, this is what will be produced more often to satisfy the viewer. And as the viewer of these scenes, you don't really know if these scenes are fake, acted out or simulated, or real. I said, I find watching corn to be very problematic, predatory, and can be criminal as well, depending on the type of corn you are consuming or what company/person is producing it, because most of these corn sites do not verify the ages and the consent of these performers before they are uploaded onto these sites. I have an example for this. When my sister was a teenager, she made a lot of bad decisions for herself and her body. She told me about an incident where she was having multiple teenage boys in her school have sex with her in the boys' bathroom. This actually happened. A group sex situation. There was a boy who was filming the entire incident on his flip phone camera. I had to scour, corn websites to find this video and report it to the moderators of the website so they could take the video down, because it is considered child pornography. She was a teenager at the time. She's underage. They didn't confirm the ages of the people in the video before it was uploaded. So this is why I think corn is very predatory. I said in my early 20s, I had an addiction to corn, and I do believe it affected me on how I approached sexual relationships. It ultimately made me feel worthless, cheap, and that men only wanted me because of my body. I feel like if I had continued to consume corn, it would have made me a man-hater and potentially could have gotten me into worse relationships/situations in the future. I have gotten to the point in my life where I don't even like watching gratuitous sex scenes in movies. I think if these scenes are more glossed over or implied, leaving stuff up to the imagination, it is much better for the audience. Plus, I do feel like it isn't good for actors being in those scenes either. It can put an actor in a very uncomfortable situation that can cause conflict in their real life relationships, or the audience just values that actor for their body alone and not anything else. I mean, I will admit, I think Henry Cavill is hot without his shirt on, but I also think he's a good actor too. Another reason why I avoid watching corn is because a lot of times you hear about horror stories of these performers pass, like Ron Jeremy, who had been a famous corn performer for many years. He was accused of forcible rape and other sexual abuse charges. A lot of these performers were sexually molested when they were younger. So they turned to the corn industry, and I think they need more therapy and healing than them going into a very predatory industry that exploits them and their trauma. I said, I do not think corn should be banned, though. But I do believe there needs to be more restrictions on how to access it online. So these sites need to have more restrictions in place where they verify the ages of who is consuming these videos, and also they need to have more transparency that they're verifying the consent of these videos. The people performing in these videos agree to have these videos uploaded onto these sites. I said also they need to verify the ages of their performers so there isn't anything illegal being uploaded onto the site, as well as nothing is put on there as revenge corn, you know? So this is what I feel like when it comes to that video, when she had talked about, you know, that person talking about how she feels like a lot of these covers are misleading. I do agree with that. I think a lot of covers are misleading, but I also think if they had put in place more, I would say if they don't want to put it on the cover, more of like a step back, and it shows you exactly what you're getting into with a step back. You know, the artist can, you know, an artist can create a step back for these books. I think something like that in place. Or you have an age range on the back that tells you exactly what you're getting into. Or it could say erotic romance, steamy romance. I think saying like steamy romance should give you that bottom line of letting you know exactly what you're getting into. Steamy, you know it's going to be, there's going to be sex on page. And like I said, it says steamy college romance. That gives you enough in here to let you know there's going to be sex on page in this, you know? So don't go based on the cover alone, you know? But like I said, I think there needs to be proper covers in place when it comes to these types of books to let you know exactly what you're getting into. A proper cover story. They used to have those back in the day. Now everything's blurred. So, like I said, covers need to change, as I stated before in another video. Also, the fact that you have to have proper stuff in a book to let you know exactly what you're going into. Like, I don't think there is any type of trigger warning for this book, and there should have trigger warnings in here. Only thing that says, it says, "Dear reader, once again, thank you so much for choosing one of my books. This one might be my favorite I've ever written. I'm so happy it's out in the world. Before you dive in, I want to know that this work contains consensual and negotiated explorations of kink." That's not really a trigger warning, in particular of power exchange. If you choose to read it, I hope you enjoy the experience. So she talks about consensual and negotiated explorations of kink, power exchange. Okay, so from what I know of power exchange, it is a type of kink, but with that type of any type of kink in a relationship, you have to have some form of consent, whether written or vocal consent, to let this person know, yes, these are my limits. These are the things that I will accept. These are the things I don't accept. So also having, I think, safe words are always good too. I'm not into that type of play for myself when it comes to real life. I don't mind reading about it, but that's not, I'm more vanilla, when it comes to my, exploits with my husband, I would say. But I think as long as you have trigger warnings in place when it comes to a book, that should give you a good enough warning that those types of things are going to be in that particular book. So I don't know if that was enough for the readers. Like I said, I'm still like, I have to read this book. I've only gotten through the prologue where they were talking about the hero in here, Lucas Blomquist. They had said his character likes to fuck. And I'm like, okay, but what kind is he into? He seems, obviously he's into kink. So I have to get through the book myself to see what I feel about it, because Ali Hazelwood is not an author that I really pick up myself because I'm not into her writing. I read the first book of, that came out and I really wasn't a fan of it. I got not into like Raylo fan fiction. So I think, proper things need to be in place, to let you know exactly what you're getting into. Erotic romance, contemporary romance, historical romance, any type of thing should have, there's space, you could put it on the back, at least. or have it on a page, you know, trigger warnings, all that stuff should be in place. So I feel like that one there kind of gave you enough. She did mention in her video the author Lori Gilmore, where a lot of her books, I'll have to put them like right here, a lot of her books, I have her current one I need to read. These are spicy romances. Based on the covers, these are very misleading, you know, and you could tell based on the covers, they're very misleading. Those ones should have been changed. They should have never been put out with those types of covers, because people are going into it assuming it's a cozy mystery. When you look at it, it looks like a cozy mystery. A lot of cozy mysteries have covers that look like that. So one would assume that that's what you're getting into. And they do have spicy sex on page scenes in those books. So I do feel like those books are misleading. I do agree with that creator when it comes to that, but I don't agree with her when it comes to everything. I do not think Corn, watching it, compares to reading a regular romance novel. Now, you could make the assumption if it comes to maybe like an erotic novel, that's more where it has to do with sex, talking about sex and all that stuff. Sex is the main focal point for the story. So I guess if maybe you wanted to compare erotic to, you know, Corn and all that stuff, I could say it's very similar, but I don't think it's the same. And like I said, when you read a romance novel, it's only really affecting you. Where I feel like when you're watching a Corn video, whether it's amateur Corn or something that's professionally done by a company, it's predatory. It's predatory. Yes, these performers are consenting to that type of filming, but I think it's very unhealthy. It's very unhealthy. It's essentially like giving drug addicts drugs. That's essentially what I kind of put it as. You're giving drug addicts free drugs. And these performers, though they are consenting to it, I don't particularly think it is healthy for them, the performer, especially if their history is of child molestation, of any type of something happening to them when they were younger that caused their brain to act differently. I think those people need therapy. I think they need therapy. They need somebody to be nice to them, you know, to be in a healthy relationship, you know. And like I said, I'm not a fan of it anymore. I consumed it and it didn't put me into a good state. And I didn't think that it actually was a benefit to any of my relationships that I got into. So this is why I choose not to consume it for myself. If other people choose to consume it, I really hope that it's people who are of age, you know, legal age. And I'm hoping that they consume it in a healthy way instead of it in being unhealthy. So yeah, I wanted to kind of like do this video of talking about different definitions of people who getting authors confused. Like I said, Nicholas Sparks is not a romance author. Emily Henry is not a romance author. She writes women's fiction. Abby Jimenez writes, women's fiction. It's mostly women's fiction. There is a romance to it, but it's women's fiction. Carly Fortune, women's fiction. A lot of these authors end up getting confused with, the romance genre. And I don't think they compare. And I especially get irritated when Emily Henry wins every fucking year on the Goodreads for romance, and she's not romance. So that I find especially irritating. And that's why I don't take those awards seriously anymore, because it's based on how many people read the book. It's not based on actual romance readers, you know? So yeah, I just wanted to go over those. I feel like frequently we have to constantly go over different authors. Like same thing with Colleen Hoover. I do not consider Colleen Hoover to be a romance author. She writes mainly women's fiction or thrillers, or she had some books that were YA. But I don't consider her to be a romance author. She may consider herself that, but I don't consider herself that. No, I don't. She's not a romance author. So I think there is certain criteria to put an author in a particular subgenre or genre. And like I said, many authors end up getting, who are considered women's fiction, do end up getting put in to the romance section, and they're not romance. Like Nora Roberts, maybe some of her novels could be considered romances, but she mainly does a lot of fiction, women's fiction, contemporary fiction. Her J.D. Robb series is more of maybe like thrillers or procedural types of novels. Like there may be like a romantic element in the story, but it's not the main focus. And usually her books are not like, you know, they kind of have like more glossed over romance scenes as well. Or sex on page, which sex on page, like I said, doesn't necessarily mean it's a romance. There are plenty of romance novels out there that are more clean, that don't have sex on page scenes to them. One author, oh, what's her name? I have a couple of her books. I'll have to put them here. She does clean fiction where the sex scenes are not there at all. But yeah, she's an author. There's another author, Mimi Matthews. She's another author that does clean romance, where there's no implied sex scenes, no gloss over. There's no sex scenes at all to her books. I've read a couple of her books and I've enjoyed them. So, like I said, romance doesn't necessarily mean sex on page. So with those, it's like there's that too. So romance does have a huge spectrum of, you know, of subgenres and different types of like steam level and all that stuff. And that's kind of really hard to, that's very hard to pin down, because steam levels is basically based on the reader. That's what they really are. They're really based on the reader. I may end up reading this book and be like, this is not, you know, this is not spicy, because I have read all kinds of steam levels at this point, because I've read romance for 20 plus years. So I know like when something's more erotic and when something is a more regular type of the romance genre. So I have to read this for myself and say whether or not I deem it to be really spicy or not. So steam levels are all different, you know? So there's that too. But I just get kind of annoyed when, you know, like I said, when people put erotica or erotic romance in the same category as regular genre romance, because they, like I said, they are different. They are different. I think if they're better marketed, you're not going to be getting those confused. And that's what I think the big bottom line is that these companies, these this one here is, which one is this company? Berkley, some of these other companies, I think if their marketing team would get better at cover stories, at proper descriptions of exactly what you're getting into when it comes to a book, you're not going to have people complaining about the covers or having people complaining about, oh, I delved into this book and I was expecting this and I got this, you know. I think if you have a proper cover story, a rating system would work better when it comes to this, you know. Then you're going to have less people complaining, less people getting their hands on books that they probably shouldn't read. Like, my eldest daughter is 12, and she says a girl in her class was reading this. So, yeah. Parents, obviously, need to monitor what their children are reading. I do that, but I know what I'm getting into, you know, because I read this type of stuff. So I know exactly what type of books have what, you know, because I have to research them. But for other parents who don't actively read, they're going to assume. They're going to make assumptions. So, as I've said before in my other video, the covers do need to change. And be better. That's what I think. But yeah, anyways, that's it for this video. I wanted to just kind of go over definitions, go over authors, how, you know, how those ones constantly get confused in the romance genre, and kind of go from there. And I would say, like, if anybody has any questions down below, let me know. I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability. But yeah, I've seen this, and it irritates me, and I just think I think frequently as a content creator, if you say like, hey, these particular authors are not romance, just FYI, or like us reiterating definitions and repeating ourselves if we have to, that this is what this means for these particular books. Sometimes lines can get blurred. I will just say, sometimes lines do get blurred. You know, like when it came to, like, a perfect example, the book Pen Pal. It was mismarketed by the author. It was her bad. And there were people going into that book expecting a happily ever after, and what they got was a not typical happily ever after. It was a erotic thriller that was marketed as a happily ever after. So there were people who read it and were pissed. So that's why, as anybody who's works in marketing for any, you know, book company, or you're an indie author yourself, know the marketing before you decide to push out a book and say that it's this. It better be that, because people will get pissed if it's not marketed correctly. You know, I know, like, if I go into a book and I'm expecting a happily ever after and one of the main characters dies, I'm going to be pissed. I'm going to be so mad. I'm going to be so mad going into that book that that author lied to me, or that company that produced that book lied to me. You have to market the books correctly. You have to make sure the cover story fits for what's inside of the book. You know, like, some people like faceless people on the covers. Particularly, I don't like that. I find them to look like mannequins, and they look creepy. I'm not into faceless people on covers. If you're going to go and have that, I'd rather just have no face at all. Just have, like, hands, like, you know, maybe this one did, or have it to where maybe you only thing you see is just the body, the torso, you know, or something like that. Or just don't have people at all on a cover. Have it to where it's something else entirely, you know. But yeah, something needs to change for these covers. Something needs to change to where we can give people proper definitions, and these books are not being, like, mislabeled and mismarketed, because people are going to expect that this is, you know, like these particular authors are romance. So when you actually delve into a regular romance that has, you know, sex on page in detail, you know, you're going to get shocked. You know, you're going to get shocked because you're expecting all romance to be like these authors that you read, and they're not. It's, like I said, it's all based on steam levels. And every book is going to be different, you know, because it all depends on how the author writes. So that's why I said I don't categorize certain authors as romance. I consider them more women's fiction based on the storylines that they give you for those books. So that's pretty much it for this video here. Like I said, if you have any questions down below, let me know. Just write it down and I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability. If you disagree with me, that's fine. You can disagree with me. But I'm just giving you the definitions of what, you know, a romance novel, what that, you know, entails, what erotic entails, erotica, you know, erotic romance, erotica, women's fiction, love stories, you know, what that all entails. Those are the proper definitions for those particular types of books, you know. Like I said, if you like Nicholas Sparks books, that's fine. I have no problem with that, but do not call them romances, because they're not, you know. You have to have the proper, you know, definition for those types of books. So they're not mislabeled. They're not mismarketed. People know exactly what they're getting into with those particular books. So yeah, anyways, that's it for this video here. Have yourselves a good day. Take care of yourselves, be kind to each other, and I'll see you all on the next video. All right, bye.